I think teams are still going to be very, very relevant, even as the technology um, kind of helps us hopefully escape some of the more repetitive stuff. But if we committed to less, focused as a team on getting that stuff done, so I think my most powerful tool for dealing with stress is I have cultivated a gratitude practice.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Innovation Roots' video interview series. And today I'm excited to have a very special guest with us, Chris Sims. Hi, Chris. How are you?
Hey, I'm very happy and excited to be here. Hello.
Thank you for joining us. And for the uninitiated, I would like to tell them a little bit about yourselves. Chris is a certified Scrum trainer, he's an Agile coach, and a recovering C++ developer. I would definitely like to know about this. So, he helps software development teams improve their productivity and happiness. He's the founder of Agile Learning Labs, and he's co authored two best selling Scrum books. So, as we're talking about you co-authoring the books, and I would like to know what inspired you to write the elements of Scrum.
So it kind of was born out of necessity. So about, I don't know, 17 years ago when I was starting Agile Learning Labs, uh, I was starting to do training and I had decided that I wasn't going to use PowerPoint and slides in my workshops. I wanted to do everything experientially, having people doing exercises and playing games and doing simulations and things like that. But one of the things I found really quickly was everybody expected to have some sort of a takeaway. And most trainers just like had their slide deck and they, put that in a little spiral binding thing and gave it to the students, and students felt good about that. But I didn't have slides, so I didn't have anything to, give them. And so I started out by just making little spiral notebooks out of, the various blog posts and articles I had written. And before each workshop, I'd be like, oh, I need to make this better. And so I'd write some more stuff and do some editing and add more things to it. And at some point, my co-author, Hillary Johnson, who had a background in publishing and writing and all of that, said, with a little bit of editing and work on flow and things like that, this could be a real book. And as I was intrigued, I'm like, oh, okay, let's go for it. And so we basically approached the creation of the book very much as an agile product development endeavor. And we worked in sprints and we had a story map and all of that. But that's kind of where the book came from, was because, gosh, I didn't have any slides in my workshops. And so I needed something to give people. And honestly, I really thought the only folks who would ever have copies of the book were people who took our workshops. And so I was surprised and grateful and just amazed when that book took off and became, for quite a while, the best-selling book on Scrum. And I do have to give credit to my co-author Hillary. She, I brought the Scrum knowledge, but she really brought the kind of the idea of having a voice to the book and having it, be something that people would really enjoy reading. I think that some of the other Scrum books that were perhaps popular at the time really kind of read like they were written by engineers, and it just they weren't as fun to read. So I think that ended up really factoring into why the book did so well. That it was kind of fun to read, and so lots of credit to my co-author Hillary for that.
That's an amazing story you shared with us. Uh, a study material turns out into a book is really interesting. Chris, when we talk about Scrum, we can't avoid to talk about daily meetings, right? And we've
Mhm.
often heard that a 15 minutes daily meeting can be the key to the success of the team or the organization. So, what's your views on this?
Uh, well, number one, I think, yeah, a well-run daily Scrum is kind of a cornerstone for a Scrum team. or even some, an agile team that's not specifically using Scrum. I do find that um, it's very often a missed opportunity though, because I run across a lot of teams doing daily scrums that actually aren't adding a lot of value. And I think it goes back to whether or not people really deeply understand the intended purpose of daily scrum. So the purpose is for the team members to get together and self-organize, self-manage, and make their work plan for the day, right? Like knowing everything we know today, what's the most important stuff, and then who's going to work on what parts of that, how are we going to get it done? And for teams that work in the complex domain where there's lots of discovery happening and adjustments that we need to make to the plan, having that daily huddle can be super important. Um, but I do find that for a lot of teams, when they learn Scrum, they didn't necessarily learn why we do a daily Scrum, right? The purpose, which is to create that plan together. But what they did learn was a particular way to structure a daily Scrum that was quite popular for quite a while, but frankly was not very effective. And that was the classic three questions, right? Well, what did I do yesterday? What am I going to do today? Do I have any blockers? And that was a way to structure a daily scrum. I think it had some shortcomings, but it was a way to structure it. But if you only learn a way to do something but you don't know why you're doing it, it's probably not going to be super effective. So I think when it's done well, when it really is focused on like, hey, what's the most important stuff today and who's going to work on what, it can be super valuable.
Absolutely, absolutely. And since we're talking about sprint planning already, so what is the most crucial aspect you think every sprint planning meeting has?
I think the thing that I have come to believe is most important, and again, very often teams don't do so well with this, is making an achievable plan. So I see as an anti-pattern teams that habitually overcommit and then they don't deliver on the commitment. And multiple problems with that. Number one, it erodes our relationship with our stakeholders, right? If every sprint we promise them 10 things, but we've never delivered more than five, pretty quickly our stakeholders are like, oh, we can't trust that team, right? That team's not very good at doing what they say they're going to do. All these kind of bad feelings come out. The other problem with it is, ironically, when we're trying to do too much, we actually work less effectively than if we made a more reasonable commitment so that we could work with focus and really get things done, right? So when we're trying to do too much, we've got too many things on our mind. We're doing more multitasking, more task switching, and that leads to less efficiency, right? We get less stuff done. But if we committed to less, focused as a team on getting that stuff done, great. Once our committed stuff is done, we can go back to our product backlog and bring the next thing in, right? I think some teams are afraid that if we didn't commit to it in sprint planning, then it won't happen. It's like, no, right? Your sprint plan should be your baseline commitment, your minimum commitment, right? Hey, stakeholders, we're going to deliver at least this. And I think that teams that get good at making that kind of commitment, where almost every sprint they deliver everything they committed to, most sprints they deliver a little bit more. That works a lot better because we have focus, right? We're doing a reasonable amount of work so we can focus on it and get it done. And for our stakeholders, it's a lot better because they can know, oh, the things that the team commits to in sprint planning, oh, we're almost certainly going to get those, right? Sometimes maybe not. There's always surprises, but most of the time we're going to get that. And then they know which things are like the maybes, right? The top couple items on the backlog, the product backlog, they might get those if things go well. And below that, they know, oh, yeah, we probably won't get those. So it's a lot easier for the stakeholders to make plans in their domain, right? Whereas if I'm a stakeholder for that team that always commits to 10 but never delivers more than five, I know I'm not getting 10 things. I've never got 10 things, but I don't know which five I'm going to get and which five I'm not going to get. So it's real hard for me to make any meaningful plans in my part of the world based on what the team just committed to, right? The only thing I can do is wait and see what actually gets done. So yeah, I think making an achievable commitment in sprint planning is perhaps the most important thing.
All right, and we work with the teams, and there are times that they're not feeling inspired or motivated. How do you keep the team members inspired to be flexible and ready to bend with the whims and challenges coming their way?
I think sometimes we get overly attached to our plans for like what we're going to do. And I think we do better when we first kind of get ourselves more focused on the goal. Like what are we trying to achieve and why, right? We're trying to solve some problem for a user or a customer or a stakeholder. And, we're trying to create value for them. That's our goal. And then, exactly what we're doing to create that value or solve that problem, that may shift over time. Maybe the customer realizes their problem or their need is a little different than they initially thought. And so they come to us and they say, oh, actually, we need something different. Well, if we're more attached to solving the problem than we are to like our plan for what we were going to do, then it's a little bit easier to go, oh, okay, well, here's a better way to solve the problem. We'll shift and change. Whereas if we got really attached to the plan, right, like, oh, we're going to do this today and that tomorrow and that the next day, and then things change, we feel like, oh, they're not letting us do our work, right? They're disrupting us. And so focusing on why we're doing what we do and having that be what matters, I think helps us adjust as the winds of change blow and the details of how we're doing that, will naturally change. And so it can help us be a little bit more resistant to that, if you will.
Great, great. So, Chris, there are different approaches we talk about when we deal with teams or inspire teams. There's something called finish to start approach. So, what's your views on that?
Well, so tell me a little bit more about that, because where I've encountered finish to start is with dealing with dependencies, but I suspect that you might be using it a slightly different way. So tell me more about it.
No, no, I'm sort of uh, talking about the same, keeping less dependencies, being able to finish on yourself, and what I mean here basically is start doing with an intent to complete it.
Oh, I love it. Okay, so now I understand the question a little better. Yeah, yes, and one of the things that I think this brings up for me is uh, guidance that one of my early mentors and coaches, Jeff McKenna, gave me, both in my own work, but also when working with clients, to help them like gain more focus and get the benefits of like limiting work in progress. And the way he said it was um, stop starting and start finishing, right? So the idea is it's our natural tendency to see something that looks important or that looks valuable or that looks good, and we want to get started on it, right? And our stakeholders are like, oh, we need this, we need this, we need this. We want people to get started on those things, right? Because when people are working on them, we feel like there's progress being made. But actually, we do a lot better to reduce the number of things we start so that we can put more energy on the most important things and really focus on finishing those things. Because it's not how much work we do that matters, it's how much stuff we finish. And so that adage of like stop starting and start finishing is really helpful, right? It's kind of at the center of the whole concept of limiting how much work you have in progress.
All right, that makes sense. And there are many technologies coming into the market, and we can't ignore the fact that the Scrum implementations are also getting affected by them. So, where do you see Scrum implementations, Chris, 5 years down the line with the advent of so many technologies?
Yeah, I think there are certain things about the kind of administrative side of things that the technologies will help us with, right? So I think tools like Jira and all of that have lots of room to improve and to be designed in ways that will better support teams and functioning. And I'm hoping that the technologies, right, and AI and all this will help that. Um, I think at its core, though, at least for the next, I don't know, decade, we're going to need people to do work. And we're going to need people to work with other people to do that work. And I think that's where the essence of Scrum will still be really, really relevant. Because at its core, right, Scrum is this set of feedback loops for a group of people to work together in ways that are going to help us get better and better at building the right product, getting better and better at building it the right way, and getting better and better at having good predictability over, scope and timing and things like that. And I think at its core, that is going to stay very, very relevant because, at least for a while, I think the less interesting parts of the work are going to be able to be more and more automated. And the human side of the work, the creativity and the understanding of like, well, what do the humans who are our market need? And how can we best meet those needs? And how can we best understand them? And how can we best understand the other people that we need to work with in order to create the solution? I think that part's going to get more and more important. And I think approaches like Scrum are going to be really key to us working well together at scale. I think teams are still going to be very, very relevant, even as the technology um, kind of helps us hopefully escape some of the more repetitive stuff. And even some of the stuff that humans are error prone at, right? A great example is, there's a cognitive bias that leads us to always overcommit, right? I talked about that with sprint planning. And, better technology and better tooling can help give us perhaps good guidance and even guardrails around, hey, team, what should we really commit to here?
That's an interesting perspective for sprint planning with AI. Thank you, Chris. And with that, we come to the end of our first round of questions and answers. Chris, thank you for going in detail with each of it. We tried to cover as much as we can around the Scrum and especially around the sprint planning. Now we will move to a very interesting round, which is a rapid fire that will help us know you a little more. So, are you ready?
I think I'm ready. Bring it.
All right. So, how do you like to start your day?
I like to start my day early and usually with either a long walk, a couple of miles, or a short run, a mile or so. And very important that the walk or the run should be to go get coffee or chai. Either way, very
Chai.
important. And when I come walk back home from it, I've got my coffee or my chai, and then I'm happy.
It's very interesting how you call it chai, not the tea. We Indians have a love for tea, which is what we call chai.
And
Yeah.
and here in the US, very often what we simply call a chai is actually more properly probably a chai tea latte. So it's like chai tea with some kind of milk, So whether it's almond milk or soy milk or regular milk. But yeah,
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. And which is the biggest challenge you have faced so far?
I would say so. When I first got Agile Learning Labs going as a company, I enjoyed creating the material, I enjoyed the coaching and the training, but finding customers was like very challenging. And I realized I had to like do this thing called sales, and I really didn't want to do sales, and I didn't really know what it really was. And so I was very lucky. An excellent salesperson from a company that I used to work at, right, a financial software company that I worked at as a developer. I reached out to him and basically asked him for some help and some pointers, and he gave me some coaching, pointed me at some resources, pointed me at a book, and I eventually came to learn that at least for what we do, the best selling is really just building a relationship and understanding the customer's perspective and, their pain points and their problems. And basically, it really is consulting, right? It's like, it's building a relationship with them where basically I'm already consulting with them. And at some point, it's like, oh, yeah, we have these bigger needs. And yeah, some training or some more formal consulting would be good for us. And so, yeah, let's enter into a deal to make that happen. But it was very intimidating at first, and I didn't know anything about it, and I had all these bad ideas in my head about what it was or how it would happen. So overcoming that was maybe my biggest challenge, at least in getting Agile Learning Labs off the ground and eventually successful.
Wow, great work done there, Chris, I would say. And what do you like more, books or movies?
Oh boy, I it's a really a toss up because I love them both. So with movies, the one I watched most recently and really loved was Wonka, which is the early story of Willy Wonka from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Oh, it's so good. Go see it. And then books. I love listening to books. Right now, I'm listening to a book called Children of Memory by Adrian Tchaikovsky. And it's like the third book in a series, the Children of Time series. I also love the Murderbot series and the Bobiverse series. So I kind of like science fiction and or fantasy kind of things.
That's interesting. That's interesting, Chris. And how do you cope with stress? I'm sure you go through it often.
Absolutely. So I think my most powerful tool for dealing with stress is I have cultivated a gratitude practice. So multiple times a day. So it usually when I sit down to a meal, I'll take a moment and just think of like, well, what am I grateful for? Well, I'm probably grateful for this meal, but what else, right, am I grateful for? And I found that there is so much in my life, and I'm sure in most people's lives, that is really amazing and wonderful that we just take for granted. And just taking a little bit of time to just notice it and think about, yeah, I am grateful for that, and all of that really helps me, and in large part because it gives me perspective, right? It helps me see like, well, yeah, things are stressful, but also things are good. Um, and I have to say that I had two events in my life that gave me broader perspective and helped me find more calm. Um, One was my very first trip to India. So, right about the time I was starting the company, I actually took a trip to India for about a month to visit some friends and travel around and see India. And I had never been really anywhere outside of the US before. And it just blew my mind how different India was and how different life was there. And um, it really gave me a lot of perspective, and it really made me realize that my worldview was actually quite small. And so having that wider perspective helps me see like my own problems, my own stresses, I don't know, in a bigger view, and get to see that, you know, yeah, they're troubles, they're stresses, but in the grand scheme of things, right, they're not tragic. And then the other thing was about 20 years ago, I was in a motorcycle accident, and it was pretty serious. And one of the things that played into it was I was really worried about some situation at work. So I was driving my motorcycle into work, and I was preoccupied with this work situation and was really stressed out about it. And boom, right, the accident happens, and I kind of come to, and I'm laying on the pavement, and I'm in a lot of pain. But I also started to kind of laugh because I was like, oh my goodness, I almost died because I was worried about something at work. And it's like at the end of the day, it's just work, right? It's just a job. It's not worth dying over. And so that experience helped reset my perspective and help me maybe deal with stressful things a little bit better because, it's like, am I going to die? No, most of the time the answer is no. So it helps me.
Oh dear. In the second experience, I'm sure I got a little shocked when you shared that. But yeah, thank you for sharing all this with us, Chris. I think that will be pretty inspiring for people who go through stress, but I think they don't acknowledge it that I am in stress, maybe because of work or personal life, but I have to find that balance in between. Thanks for sharing your story there. And we are coming to the end of the discussion, Chris, and we touched upon many things, but at the end, I would like your expert tip and conclude the discussion. So, what would you like to advise the new generation of Scrum Masters?
I think my two pieces of advice for new Scrum Masters are keep learning, right? The more you learn, the more effective you're going to be. And um, also find community. One of the things that really helped me in my journey was discovering that there's this large community of Agile practitioners that you can connect with at conferences, at meetup groups, places like that. And I found people to be so generous with sharing their experience and their wisdom and their thoughts, and even in just the camaraderie, right? Because being a Scrum Master, you're a change agent, and change is difficult. And getting to talk with and commiserate with other people who are doing that kind of work and know that you're not alone can be, I don't know, it just feels supportive, right? It's encouraging.
Hmm.
So yeah, keep learning and definitely engage with community so that you know you're not alone.
Absolutely, these are two wonderful pieces of advice, Chris. And I'm sure the listeners are going to enjoy this whole discussion. I would like to thank you again for taking out some time to be part of this discussion. I thoroughly enjoyed.
Yay. I've had a really good time too, and I hope there's some value in it for the folks who are listening and watching. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.